It's time to down tools for a bit. Welcome to the ToolShed, the influential podcast for anyone and everyone involved in the building industry. Here's your host, Mick Hawes.
Good afternoon or good morning. I don't know when you're listening to this, but hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of the ToolShed. On this particular episode, I'm speaking to Angela Hucker from EPIC. EPIC stands for, what does it stand for? It stands for Empowering People in Construction, which I think is really, really clever, and really excited to talk about the history and what Angela is doing with this company. So we'll get to her in just a quick sec. I need to remind you that if you haven't taken the scorecard, there's a builder scorecard. There's a link somewhere up there. If you click on that, it's a 90-second exercise that will identify the roadblock issue that you have in your business. Each business has a unique roadblock issue. It's one of those frustrating things that you're probably that close you can't see it. If you can identify it and fix it, a whole raft of other issues disappear really quickly. So it is a really simple way to be able to make big gains in progress with improving your business, just by being able to identify what that is. So 90 seconds, go click the link and take the scorecard and see how you fare. So let's talk to Angela. Angela, really great to have you on the podcast. You've got a company called EPIC. You're actually in Tasmania too, which is kind of exciting because
it's good to be talking to someone else in Tassie for a change.
Yeah, it's like, where are all of the Tasmanians? Well, we're all down here. So
Exactly.
love to hear a little bit about the backstory. I know that you've been involved with the family business and been involved with construction for a lot of years, maybe 30 plus years. And so you've been there through a lot of shifts and turns and changes. But I'd love to hear the short version of how you ended up deciding to build a company that is contributing to the forward movement of the industry.
Thanks, Mick. I appreciate that. So basically, as you touched on, I've been in the industry for about 30 years, and that actually started at a very young age in my family business. I then, I never planned a career in construction because, really, who does? You sort of just fall into it, I reckon. And then it just ended up that I was actually sailing up the Queensland coast on our boat and stopped into Hervey Bay, and then I was sort of working on a pre-sales for a Peppers resort up there, and then I got asked to move over to the construction side once they'd had enough pre-sales, and that's kind of how I fell back into it, and that was in my mid-20s actually my late 20s I should say, that I fell back into it after being in the family business. And then the journey just started from there. Like I was just doing stuff, and I ended up becoming a fly-in, fly-out worker, which I did for many years, about 7 to 8 years. I was a fly-in, fly-out worker. And in my first camp environment, I had been FIFO for a couple of years before I actually ended up in my first camp environment. And I just saw another level of construction that I hadn't seen before, with being in an environment where everyone's kind of living together. I was in a 2,000-person camp. I was one of only 100 females in that camp. It was very intense, very overwhelming. Our rosters were quite horrendous. We had a 4-week roster straight where we were working the 28 days straight with 1 day off and then 7 days at home. And doing those rosters and then seeing what people were dealing with and then how life kind of goes on still at home, but then you're at this construction site and it's pressure and intense and you're away from home and away from your network. And I've always gone, well, when I actually get my chance to help make a difference in the industry, I'll do that. So that opportunity actually came about in 2023 when I saw there was a lot more initiatives happening to help promote the industry to get more women into the construction industry. So that was something that in my time hadn't been done before. And that's where I kind of saw that as a bit of an opening to go, okay, the industry's ready now to maybe listen to a female's perspective about what's needed in the industry. And so that's when I established EPIC. So that was kind of how it was founded, essentially.
Yeah. And like the topics and the issue that Epic addresses. If someone jumps on the website, that you'll see that that you're addressing things like sexual harassment and discrimination, bullying, intimidation, things like that. How or what has sort of caused you to focus in on that? I mean, I know it still goes on, and I was an apprentice electrician, and back in the day, definitely experienced intimidation and bullying. But like back then, which is a long time ago, you kind of, I don't know, I didn't even know how to say it properly, but you kind of just accepted it. It was part of the entry to the industry, and you kind of just accepted it. And unfortunately, I think that you then take it on board as then it becomes your role when the next apprentice or whatever joins the organisation. We need to put them through the same process as well, because we did. But it's a bit crazy. But what caused you to get involved in just addressing these sorts of things in the industry? It's a big task.
It's a massive task. It is a big beast to tackle. And what caused me to do it is because I've actually dealt with those issues. And I've gone, if we actually want to help promote this industry to more women and to get more women in, we actually need to make it safer for them to want to come in, and then, more sustainable long term to keep them. And the only way we can do that is literally by addressing these systemic issues, as you touched on, Mick, like, well, that's kind of how it was done. So then that's how the apprentices, you get taught as an apprentice to do it. But it doesn't mean it's right, because those behaviours aren't healthy. So, for me, I'm not focusing on attracting women to the industry. There's a lot of people doing great work in that regards. My focus is on, and it's not just for the women, it's for everyone in the industry, because it's not just a woman problem. This is something that affects everyone in the industry. Let's actually help fix these issues, so then that way we're not losing the people that we're losing, and that we can actually help keep people longer. The other part that I'm really passionate about in regards to this as well is that now there is actually a lot more open conversation regarding the mental health and the psychological safety in the industry, and now there's obviously psychosocial hazards as well that have been identified under the Workplace Health and Safety Act. So now there is that awareness of these types of things under legislation as well. That's where it's gone, okay, now I can actually help share my lived experience to help create that meaningful change for the next generation. And it's, for me, part of what we have a duty and an obligation to do as leaders who've got this lived experience of working in the industry is to help pass that knowledge on, not to hold on to it, but to pass it on to help the next lot of people coming through.
I'm just kind of putting myself in the shoes of a residential builder. So there might be they've got maybe half a dozen team members or thereabout, something like that. And they might be listening to this and they might be nodding their head and going, yeah. But my suspicion is that potentially they're not really thinking, well, yes, this is an issue in the industry, and yes, something needs to be done about it. But it kind of doesn't affect me because none of that stuff's happening in my business. And so what would you say to somebody who might be listening to this and thinking, yep, it's a good cause, that's not happening in my business? Is there something that they need to look out for, or that they're just not noticing that could be causing issues in their business that they just haven't realised yet, but it might come up and bite them on the arse at some stage in the future? How do you address that?
Yeah, well, I think, and that's a good point, especially with residential builders, because there's a lot of, small SMEs, who are those residential builders, or, like even the electricians and chippies and plumbers and things like that, which I understand, they're small family-run businesses essentially, or slightly bigger, and they don't have an in-house, HR team, safety team, all of that sort of stuff. So they're probably if anything, I think they're probably, if they've got their fingers on the pulse with it, because they are a smaller, close-knit team, they probably are a bit more aware of it. But the thing is that these issues aren't just isolated to their company, because they have a supply chain that they deal with as well. And they might take on board like a young apprentice or something, or have someone who's actually going and, picking up the tools and picking up the equipment and ordering materials and this and that and the other, who might be experiencing it. And we need to be able to make sure that everyone is actually understanding, firstly, what is it? What does it look like? Because a lot of people go, oh, that may not be happening. But then that comes down to not having an open mindset to understanding, well, what is this actual issue? Because the way that it works under the Workplace Health and Safety Act with the chain of command and everything, like these are actually quite strict regulations now. And now that the industrial manslaughter has come into play as well, where there's now people incurring those financial penalties, companies actually have a legal obligation to understand, well, what is this and how is that going to impact me? Because legally and financially, they're going to be the ones who cop the fines and end up in jail if they don't know and something does happen. So they actually have that responsibility as a PCBU as well to understand. And then once they understand, well, what it is, then it's like, oh, okay, well, what can we do to actually help, within our business or, that broader community? Because it may not be within their business, but it may be a client. Like they might be building a house for someone, and that person might be using bullying tactics to their staff. And how do you call that out? Because they're the client. But, that's where it's being able to help them have that awareness and then what to do if they do experience it as well.
Yeah. I just want to play devil's advocate, and I was tossing up whether to ask you this question or put this on the table or not, but, I'm going to do this without a net.
That's okay. Go for it.
Just devil's advocate, because I just know that there are people out there, like if there is physical harm done, and you just mentioned, there's all of these, penalties for it, that potentially jail and so on and so forth, and there's physical intimidation as well. But what do you say to the people who are, when you start to talk about bullying, and it's not a physical thing, it's like it's a tone of voice, it's a joke in somebody's mind or what have you, someone's getting offended by it and all that sort of stuff, and there will be people that will say, you just need to harden up, princess. How do you address that attitude? What is the problem with that attitude, and how do you address it?
So there is actually a term for that sort of behaviour, which has only just come out recently, and it's actually called microaggression. So it's actually that really covert kind of behaviour that it isn't just one thing that does it. It's kind of, we've likened it to, it's that death by 1,000 cuts, because it's not one thing that's very out there in your face, outright bullying and stuff, but it could just be that comment or something like that happens, and you kind of sit there and you question and you go, hang on, what's going on here? Am I losing my marbles? Is that right or not right? For me, and particularly being a woman working in these environments that I've worked in, and they've been some pretty intense environments. And as I touched on, I've experienced all of this. Like I have had men come up and, the client who was my counterpart, and he was a male, come up to me on site at 6:00 at night after everyone had left. It was only the construction manager and I there, and called me out to have a discussion with me outside of the site office. And he was basically 10 centimetres in front of my face, just screaming at me, and you could literally see the steam coming out of his ears, actually.
Spit on your glasses.
Well, it was pretty much like that. But I just stood there and I just went, I'm just going to let him vent, and I'm not going to react, because I'm not going to lower my standards to buy into his standards of being intimidating and bullying and displaying those aggressive behaviours towards me. And I'm just like, I'm just not going to even react and give him any lead with it at all. And I just let him vent and have his thing and have his little, steamy moment. And then I just said to him, are you finished? And he's like, yep. And I said, okay, well, we'll talk about this tomorrow. I'm going home. And don't get me wrong, because then I walked into the office and then I slammed down my stuff and I went, you effing A, and how dare you do that? But I didn't do it in front of him. That was the difference. And to me, it's like, it's very easy to react in the moment, because it can be, when you're being confronted with those behaviours, you can get quite emotional. But it's actually knowing how to have that self-control. Self-awareness is something that's really big as well, which I find is lacking a lot in the industry, because people are just too busy spurting rather than actually going, hang on, let's have a think about how we can approach this in a manner that's professional and stuff as well. So, for me, it's actually, I always say it's your own personal reputation at the end of the day that's always on display, regardless of what that is. And it's, how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as someone who's aggressive and intimidating and bullying and yelling at people, and someone who smashes hard hats and all that kind of behavior that's really not healthy? Or do you want to be remembered as someone who's respectful and considerate, got self-control, knows how to handle situations? And that's, it comes down to your own personal reputation. Who do you want to be?
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. We're always trying to bring you information that's going to make your life as a builder much easier. So give us a thumbs up and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. I'd like to unpack how you got to that point, because again, playing devil's advocate and looking at other scenarios. So there are scenarios where there are just, people in organisations and team members that just complain and blame, and nothing is ever their fault. And, in my world, there has to be some form of responsibility. What that gentleman, and I use the term loosely, was doing with you, or behaving in front of you, was inappropriate behaviour, but somehow you had a very high level of personal responsibility, and you were able to choose the appropriate response to that in that moment. And it would be great if more people could learn how to do that. So my question is, how did you learn how to do it? How can others learn how to do it? And is there some sort of crossover point where, where people do get frustrated with other people because they just simply will not ever take any personal responsibility? Everything is always somebody else's fault.
Oh, look, I mean, that is construction, isn't it?
Well, it's life.
It's a big part of construction. Accountability, like, that's a big one. People actually taking that accountability, that personal responsibility as well. But to me, it really does just come back to you as an individual person, because this is what it all is at the end of the day. The thing is, we come together as a collective, but we're not all living. One thing that I've seen is a big disconnect of what's happening. Yes, we're all responsible for our own actions, and we're all responsible for what we can control ourselves. Obviously, there's external factors that have an impact on us. One thing that I see is a big disconnect in the industry is values, and it's not well driven as to the values of companies. You see all these, nice things in some places where they've got their corporate values and, trust and integrity and, respect and innovation and blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. But they don't live it. I mean, it's just words on paper. And to me, values is something that is lived and breathed and experienced every single day, and it has to be driven from the top down. So let's say, example, going back to your point about a residential builder, that residential builder has to know what their values are of dealing with clients, dealing with suppliers, and dealing with their employees, and be able to live, breathe, and instill that in that environment every single day, because that's what creates the culture. And then everyone has that personal responsibility to uphold those values, and it has to be, everyone is accountable for it, everyone is held to task for it, and you're not going to lower your standards to accept anyone who doesn't live by those values. And this is what's missing, is that people aren't having those values to underpin everything. Everyone's just coming in and it's like a bunch of headless chickens, really. but not actually something that's actually more centered and defined, and everyone's on the same page and working to a shared goal, essentially.
So how does Epic Services, your company, help? As I said, that you address different areas of challenges in the business, like the sexual harassment, discrimination, bullying, etc. Somebody listening to this wants to reach out for some help. What does Epic Services do? How do you interact? What's the experience somebody could expect if they reached out to you to get your support and your services?
They would experience an epic experience, because that's what it's all about, of course.
Of course.
It's all in the name. Come
Yeah.
on. No, but basically my main focus of how to I've got a couple of drivers, essentially. So my main focus is support, and that's through peer support. Honestly, Mick, I wouldn't be standing here today if I didn't have the peers I've had around me over the last, few decades of whilst I've been in the industry. Peer support is vital, because that's actually, and speaking as a minority who's been in this environment as well, my peers have generally always been men, but they've been good, decent men, family men, who are like brothers now. They're actually, I call them my family, because they're more family. But peer support is so vital, and it's like when you actually experience these issues, and when I have personally experienced these issues in the industry, they have been the ones who've been there, who have been able to help me and support me, come to have meetings with me, to challenge project directors and stuff like that as well, be asked to be put in rooms next to me to protect me and everything like that. So peer support is vital. And it got identified through a research last year that I was involved in, that it's actually a missing piece in the industry, because no one is actually providing that peer support. There's a lot of members and things like that, but not something where peers can actually connect and help support each other. So it's things like, when it comes down to the bullying, for example, you may think because you're working on a construction site, you're the only one dealing with that issue, and you can't really raise it because you think it's only you experiencing that. You don't want to raise it to your boss. It may be your boss that's actually bullying you. I'm not saying that's the case, but who do you talk to about it? And a lot of people are actually suffering in silence. So that's where, by having a peer support community around you, you've got like-minded people where it's safe, it's judgment-free and confidential, and you can come in and actually say, hey, I'm dealing with this issue. Has anyone else experienced it? What can I do to navigate this? And part of that is tailoring that with coaching as well. So being able to actually help people understand what I spoke about, like with how I've been able to handle those issues, like how to have that own personal integrity, how to, your own personal reputation, and how to manage these kind of really difficult situations without losing face, essentially, and lowering your standards as well, but helping people, understand where do they want to go, what do they want to achieve in this industry, and what path do they want to travel. So that's my big part, is the peer support. Another big part of what I'm addressing is, obviously, as I touched on, those systemic issues. So we've partnered with a technology partner, and we're in the process of developing a number of training modules on these exact issues. And we're partnering that with a number of those human skills that I touched on as well. So these are things like, how do you confidently communicate to someone when you're being bullied, hey, please don't do that? Because unless you're actually taught how to be confident, how to communicate effectively, how to be respectful, how to, have that mindset so that you don't get overwhelmed with it, all those kind of soft skills, I say, or human skills, then when you're actually faced with those issues, you don't know what to do because you actually haven't got those skills. So we're partnering with a technology partner to address those issues. And the beauty of the technology with my technology partner is that it's actually designed to uncover those subconscious biases. So if, for example, if we look at sexual harassment, that's where, as you touched on earlier in the piece about, just toughen up, that's the way it's always been done. When it comes down to sexual harassment, because that is pretty common. That's the way it's always been. Like you're in a man's world here. Like, you know, we've always said these sort of jokes or things like that. The way the legislation is now, like it's not okay. You can't do that. And the way that this technology is designed to uncover those subconscious biases is just to make people think, oh, I actually didn't realize that was sexist. Now I understand that it is. Because when you can make people consciously aware of what their biases are, because we've all got them, we're all human. I mean, we've all got subconscious biases that, you know, form our behaviors and our patterns and beliefs and everything. But when we can uncover those, that's when we can actually start to shift the behaviors because people are then consciously aware of something that's been driving what they're doing. And then we will start to see a change in the culture essentially. And I mean, it's not an overnight job, of course, because we didn't get here overnight. Like it's something that's going to take some time to do it.
Yeah.
But it's something that has to be done as well. So, and it's for everyone. It's not, I mean, this is not a woman's problem. This is a community problem. It's everyone's issue to help tackle, and it has to be done from, you know, if you're looking at big corporate companies, you know, from the board level all the way down to the tradespeople on site and everyone in between, because everyone's actually got to be part of this journey to help make it better for the industry and more sustainable long term as well.
Mm. So what's the best way for people to reach out to you, contact you, and when they do, what are the first steps that they take? What can they expect?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me on our website, which is www.epicservices.group. There is a contact us page there, and then what we'll do is we'll just organise to have a discussion with them, find out, you know, what their gaps are, where they may need help with. You know, more than happy to spend that time with people to understand what support they need, and then we can work on, a strategy moving forward of what's best to support them.
Yeah,
The
brilliant.
end goal is that obviously making sure that people are getting the support that they need to
Yeah.
help set them up for success. That's the end goal. So
Yeah, perfect.
yeah.
Want to thank you for sharing and taking the time to come onto the podcast. I know that I've watched the TED talk that you did. Tell me about that. How did you get involved with that, and how nervous were you doing it?
Oh. Well, being a TEDx speaker was actually always had been a dream of mine, interestingly, and yet I'm actually quite the introvert. So standing up on a stage that ends up going global, you know, it's quite a contrast, I can tell you. But no, I actually just submitted the application. Like I just submitted the application and then I got shortlisted and then I had to do a 1-minute video to talk about my topic that I wanted to talk about and how it linked to the theme, because what people may not know is that when a TED talk production is being done, like with us, that it was done here in Hobart in 2024, but we actually had a theme which was called the ripple effect. So you actually have to say how your talk relates to the theme. And then I got the call. I'm pretty sure I deafened the guy when he told me because I was so
Screaming.
busy screaming and going, "Oh my God, I love you! Thank you so much. You've made my day." Um, and then it was just all systems go from there. I think from the time I got the call to when we actually got, you know, to the event, it was 7 weeks, and it was a very intense 7 weeks because I was pretty much on the road most of that time as well, speaking at conferences and stuff. So, and then on the day, um, I was on in the because they actually do the production for the whole day. So there was 11 speakers all up on the one day, and I can't remember what speaker number I was, but I was between lunch and afternoon tea, and I was the second.
That's a shocking spot.
Yeah, I was the second speaker, and anyway, I didn't have lunch, so I was starving, but I was downstairs in the green room, and then I actually had this holy shit moment that I'm like, holy shit, like it's all just totally escaped me. Like I can't even remember my opening line. And by then, like, you know, I'd spent weeks, like there was literally weeks writing, revising, practicing. And then once, because the talks actually have to be approved as well before they have to all be submitted to TED as well in the US. The talks have to be approved, and then once they're approved, then you actually start practicing and memorizing. So that was only 2.5 weeks before the event that
Wow.
we had to actually memorize the talk. So yeah, there was a lot of listening, like it was just on repeat all night whilst I was sleeping. I was waking up during the night listening to my own voice. I'm like, yeah, this is a bit weird, but anyway. And yeah, and then when we actually got there on the day in the morning, and we actually had to handle our scripts over, so I really did have that holy shit moment. I don't even have my script to have a look to remember what my opening line is. And then I walked out to the stage, and then you do, like, it just kicks in. It's in your muscle memory and stuff. But yeah, most people actually don't know this, and I can't believe I'm actually going to share it. I was actually quite nervous, and my right leg was shaking pretty much the whole first 10 minutes of my talk. And I was standing there and I could feel the legs shaking, like when a dog gets an itch and the legs start shaking.
Yeah.
It was, and I'm like, shit, I hope people aren't actually noticing my legs shaking so much. But and then you just get into it. You get into the groove, and then you find, and it all seems to just come back into you. But it was quite an honour to be able to have the opportunity to share my story about an experience I had whilst I was a FIFO worker, and what I did to help sort of navigate that particular issue, and to be able to get that out onto a global platform as well was quite an honour. And I'm very grateful to have that experience. So yeah.
Well done for doing that, and being brave enough to do that. It's a well-known thing that most people have fear of public speaking above fear of death.
Yes, that's
it's a
right.
lot more scary than death.
Yes.
But I believe, statistically speaking, no one's ever died from public speaking. So
they haven't, but I can tell you there's certainly some terrifying moments with it.
Very good.
For me, it's like that's how you grow as a person. You push yourself out of your comfort zone, and you do these things that actually really scare the crap out of you. And it's just like, I'm just going to do it. And, hey, I didn't die. And, that's not a bad thing. So.
No, brilliant. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for being on the podcast. Hope we get to talk to you again in the future.
Sounds great. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
There you go, folks. That is epicservices.group. We'll make sure that the link is in the description. Reach out, have a conversation with Angela. Jump on YouTube and Google Angela's TEDx talk. It's a great talk. You won't notice a leg shaking. I certainly didn't notice a leg shaking. It was just fine. But reach out and have that conversation. And it's something that we do need to be aware of in creating a better, more enjoyable, more productive, safer place for people in the work environment. So very, very important stuff. Before we go, make sure you click the other link in the description, which is the Builder's Scorecard. Take the scorecard, 90 seconds, and you'll get delivered in your inbox shortly thereafter some solutions as to how you went, or some solutions to the challenges that were identified based on how you went with the questionnaire. So it'll be very, very valuable, and it's only 90 seconds of your life. I highly encourage you to do it. But we'll be back with another episode of the ToolShed podcast. Before you know it, I'm Mick Hawes from Builders Business Black Belt. That is all. I'm out. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the ToolShed. If this podcast struck a chord with you, make sure you spread the word by sharing it with your mates in the building industry. We love your help to make the building industry better for everyone involved.